Well, these are the books that we're going to talk from this evening. And the top two, the PMBOK and the Standard for Program Management, are going to be what most of the content for all 4 sessions is going to be based on. The second 2 are the books that I would recommend for a myriad of reasons. And we'll talk about that for a moment. So both of the bottom books have significant number of test questions, and the book on the left also includes exam simulation test, and there's actually a couple in there. Whatever books you use, make sure that they have a large number of questions and exam tests. If you'll excuse me for just a moment. I have a okay. So Verlette, I'm going to forward a couple things to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I got a little distracted by the texting. We want you to be able to take practice tests and have significant numbers of questions. And the more questions you answer, the better that you are going to be able to do. The Ginger Levin book, one of the reasons that I recommended that is Ginger Levin was a PMI fellow, and she was one of the folks that helped develop the PgMP exam. So she was very well aware of what content needs to be included and the way that the practice test needed to be structured. The test questions themselves are not as structured as the exam is, but more in the sense so that you know what content is on the exam. And by that, I mean, they are not necessarily in a multiple choice format. They are done so that you know the content. The intent is for you to be able to pass the exam. And to pass the exam, you need to be able to pass the test, the practice test, with a score of 80 or better on a consistent basis. Whether you take the simulated exams from the Ginger Levin book or some other source, there are several other sources. That's really the magic number of what you need to score on the practice test in order to be able to be successful with the exam. Go over the exam structure. So a couple things about this. Just like the PMP, you have sample questions embedded as well as the actual questions. So when you are looking at the test, there's a total of 170 questions, but only 150 of them count. You have 4 hours to complete the exam. It's a pass-fail exam. It is separated by domain. So when you take the test, it is possible for you to pass one section, fail another section, and still pass the test. There are domain proficiency ratings, and we'll go over those in just a second, but there are multiple versions of the exam. Just like the PMP exam, there are easier versions and hard versions of the exam. they will blend. So for some domains, it is a very easy question, and then other domains, it's very difficult, and it's blended. So there is no magic score that you need to pass for every domain or every question. That's why the suggestion is when you take the sample exam, that you get an 80 or better. These are the 5 domains. So in strategic program management, which goes over the link between the program and strategic execution, 15% of the exam, which yields about 25 questions. Then it goes to the life cycle, which is the bulk of the exam. 74 questions from the program life cycle. Benefits, about 18 questions. Stakeholder, about 27. Governance, about 23. So by and large, the majority of the test questions will come from the program life cycle. However, you're only going to have that as one of the 5 domains on the exam. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm talking about? Does this make sense? Okay. So from the scoring report, the scoring report is slightly different by comparison to the PMP exam. You have 3 grades, if you will: proficient, moderately proficient, or below proficient. It is possible for you to get below proficient on 2 sections and still pass the exam. I don't know if you caught this little post-it that was on a prior section, but only about 50% of folks pass this on their first try. Part of that is just the extreme complexity of the questions and the content. I will tell you, even when I took the exam, I clicked the button to say I was done, and I sweated it for 30 seconds waiting for the results to come back because I wasn't sure if I passed or not, even though I knew that I had studied for months to take the exam. But these are the categories, if you will, that each domain will be judged. You need to have moderately proficient as an average for the 5. Okay. So how the scoring works, right? Some reports have a diagnostic and individual. A lot of that depends on the testing center. Some of that is somewhat irrelevant at this point because most folks will be taking this certification exam online. So how this has been modified over the last few months with COVID, not completely clear, but my guess is that it would contain the diagnostic information because you are doing the session online and you are being monitored. Remember that the assessments are a collection of questions, and as I mentioned earlier, one collection of questions could be significantly more difficult than another section of questions. There is not a central passing point. So overall, you are looking for the somewhat leveled out average of 80 or better on your practice exams to ensure that you pass the overall exam. Okay, there are, as I mentioned, both easy versions and hard versions. If you can get 80% or better on all your practice exams, you will, in all likelihood, pass the test because you're going to get a combination of hard questions and easy questions on the exam. Okay, so now we're going to go through some definitions and concepts that I want to make sure that we are all clear on. And part of the reason that I like to do this, there are a lot of terms that are used incorrectly, or that are used in one way in one industry and another way in another industry. Let's just take the word blocked. If I'm talking to an individual about directions, that's very likely a city block. But if I'm talking to a 2-year-old, they're making a building out of it. So you have to think about the context and what's being used and how it's applied. So part of the reason why I like to start with the definitions and concepts, all the content here is contained within the standard and within the PMBOK, and should be things that are familiar to you at this stage, but I want to be careful and make sure that I include it, because all of us is somewhat corrupted, if you will, in our thinking, because we work in a business environment that doesn't necessarily call things by the same terms that PMI uses. So for a program, the approved definition, a group of related projects, sub-programs, and program activities that are managed in a coordinated way to obtain benefits that you wouldn't get from managing them individually. Those program activities could contain operational components. Benefit, that is the outcome of the actions and behaviors and services of what the program is putting out. The benefactors, if you will, are stakeholders within your program. And then the concept of program management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques. These are standard PMI definitions. They come straight out of the standard for program management. You will very likely have at least one question, if not 3 questions, based on these definitions that are on this page. Okay. From the performance domains, these are the 5 domains that are included on the PgMP exam. Strategy alignment, this is basically how you are executing strategy. Benefits, stakeholder engagement, and governance. The life cycle of the program has tentacles into all 4 of these areas. So here are the descriptions of the domain, the way PMI calls them. You will also have at least one question with a description that you will need to have on the exam. Please make sure you're familiar with the verbiage. I will also point out that very likely it is one word that is the variation between correct and incorrect when you have descriptions or definitions. That is how we are coached to write the questions for the exam, is the variation of one word, like not or is. So please make sure you read these carefully and you have the content well understood, almost where you could repeat it without thinking. So your strategy alignment, which was the domain that we'll discuss first, is how you are achieving the strategic objectives for your organization, and then benefits, stakeholder governance, and life cycle. Okay. So strategic delivery. This is a little bit different than how corporate America sees the implementation of strategy. So when you are studying for this exam, just like you did for the PMP exam, if you have that, there is almost a separation between what is contained within the text and what is happening at work. So please make sure that you separate yourself from the verbiage, content, and uses of terms at work and how it is used for the exam. They are not necessarily akin. And so I want to make sure that we're clear on how that works. Many organizations have a strategic execution department that's separate from the PMO that is not necessarily aligned. From a PMI perspective, they are one and the same. Portfolios, programs, and projects are how strategic elements and strategy itself is delivered. On PMI's perspective, it is designated to the portfolio, and then programs and projects are created from that point going forward. Here's a sample of projects, programs, and portfolios. I want you to note the content words of sub-portfolios and sub-programs contained within this diagram. It is possible to have a program embedded under a program and a portfolio embedded under a portfolio. I will give you an example. Many of us who live in the Charlotte metro market, or if you work in IT outsourcing, you are familiar with a concept of going through a merger or acquisition within your business. That merger unto itself is a program of work that needs to be executed. The benefit from that strategic execution is one company instead of two. There are multiple programs of work embedded underneath that merger program, blending all of the HR, blending all of the marketing, blending all of the operations, blending all of the infrastructure. Each one of those would be considered a sub-program under the main program of delivering a merged organization at the end of the program work. Okay. Here is another conceptual drawing from a relationship perspective. So at a strategic level, generally this is where your portfolio will sit. Not all portfolios sit at an enterprise level. Some are embedded within an organization and do a lot of operational work or line level strategic goals. An ePMO, if you have one within your organization, this is where it would sit. And they would take the mission of the organization, its strategy, and what the expectation is for delivery, and then pass that down into segments of work. Very likely, the answer is it's going to be one or more programs that will be delivered through that portfolio, and that will be broken down into components. The programs have 5 domains. There are only 3 phases in the program lifecycle. Definition has 2 parts, delivery has a couple parts, closure has a couple parts. We'll go through those as we go through the program lifecycle. But generally, you're preparing for the program, you're doing the program work, and then you're closing it out. So if you think about that from a lifecycle perspective, those are what goes in those 3 buckets. Your content for the program, all of the work, the sub-programs, the projects, the operational work, the strategic work that's not embedded within a particular component, all of that activity is contained within the project delivery phase. So for example, in the merger example that we just used, all of the work that's done leading up to the merger, that would go into the definition phase. The moment the merger is executed, that's when a delivery begins and that work begins. Once the merger is closed, all of the delivery ends, and then you move into your transition to operations and you'd go through closure. Okay. Here are the elements contained within the life cycle. So you have formulation and preparation for your program definition, and this is the planning part that I just mentioned. So if you are, for example, planning to make an acquisition, this is where you would do what's commonly called red folder undercover work, where you make a lot of discovery known to the key players of the intended target for acquisition. And that's finding out how they're set up, whether or not some things need to be eliminated, whether some things need to be blended, whether some things just need to be added as they are. All of that preparation work contains within this definition phase. Every single component is embedded within benefits delivery, or that middle section where this is where all the work happens. And at the end, you do the transition and the closeout, and that is your program closure. Oops, I'm so sorry. There are generally three sources of programs. Strategic, and this is basically everything that is run from the top that says this is a strategic element or a strategic objective I want this program to deliver. Those components would be embedded in this type or this source of a program. The merger that I just used as an example would be an example of a strategic program. If you are doing an organizational redesign, that would also be within the strategic category. Compliance. This is a little tricky. Most organizations have within their strategic goal set to be compliant within all the relevant regulatory organizations, but it is a separate source of programs. So for example, after the Fukushima meltdown in Japan, there was a whole slew of work that was recommended by NRC and its sister organizations across the globe to prevent that type of meltdown happening within their own respective countries. So all of those nuclear plants in the respective countries that are supported by that agency were given a new batch of directives to execute to make sure that they were compliant to prevent a meltdown affecting them in the same way within that organization. There are all sorts of other regulatory requirements, HIPAA, SOX, just depends what organization that you are a party to, that exposure to regulations would mandate some compliant source of program. And then emergent source of programs, process improvement is also one, but there's this little thing called COVID that showed up last year. This would also be considered an emergent program. If you think about that, I'll use the organization I was with at the time. Like many organizations, they were trying to determine how digital transformation was going to occur for them. And then COVID came and it forced digital transformation to them. They were able to take all the planning they had done to that point and determine how are they going to move forward and make it happen and put all those pieces of work together to execute and start doing their digital transformation on a dime. And that was because of COVID. And they're not alone. Almost all major corporations within the United States did the same thing during the same amount of time in order to move forward. Those that struggled, those are the ones that had a harder time adapting, and many organizations, even as late as last summer, were still challenged with how to deal with operations and function without the ability to be in person to execute operations. Those sources of programs, those emergent programs, are the hardest ones to deal with because you can't plan them out. Okay. So benefits, value, and strategy. The benefits, the strategic benefits that you obtain from program delivery, the value that it provides to the organization, those benefits and value allow the organization to move ahead and to succeed, provided, whoops, sorry, not sure what happened, provided that that strategic goal that was set works for the organization and where they're headed. There are a great number of times that strategies are executed, it turns out to be not the right direction for that organization, and they get a lot of trouble. The value needs to be determined and what that looks like from both a tangible and intangible way so that the organization can properly assess. Many times you will note that there is a review, typically it's an annual review, of projects and programs in process or in flight within an organization. It's a portfolio review, and certain things are terminated, not necessarily because anybody within the project or program has done anything wrong, but because that work no longer aligns with their strategic intent. That review, if you will, is to make sure that the benefits and value that are delivered by the work within the program continue to align with the organization's strategy and where they're headed. So from a benefits perspective, one of the things that you'll need to look at is a benefits map. And here is one example of one from PMI. If you'll notice, all the components are listed and what benefit is coming from which component. You'll notice that some benefits come from more than one component. When that happens, you have two arrows heading into that benefit, and you don't get the consolidated program benefits very likely until program closure. It is possible to achieve some benefits during that middle section, during benefits delivery, but the full value of the program typically is not realized by the organization until program closure, and then you move into sustainment. One of the things that is important in program closure is the transition of benefits. So for example, in the merger example that we provided, one of the things that organizations do as a part of merger activity is determine what departments' work are redundant once the changes have occurred or once the blending has happened, if you will. Those individuals that are released or displaced or transferred to other areas, those roles are taken out of operations for future year. If you hire those individuals back, you've lost your benefit or part of your benefit because the benefit was not transitioned properly. That's just one example. There are many others, but how you transition your benefits is how you go from having a program benefit to having a sustained benefit once the program closure has occurred. The program manager role, quite a bit different from a project manager role. Project managers in general are tactical in nature, very task-oriented individuals. They need to be that way to make sure that the work is executed. Program managers, while they do have to have some sense of tactical and a task-oriented nature, they also need to be able to view things from a broader perspective. They need to look within the organization and within the program of work and ensure that things are aligned, to be able to see potential risks that may be on the horizon, also be able to look through and ensure that all the proper stakeholders are engaged as you walk through. A large part of a program manager's role is not only communication, but also change management. Being able to communicate with stakeholders is just one piece of that work. Being able to identify what corresponding changes are needed in order to support that change is exceedingly important, and that is something that a program manager must be able to do to be successful. Here's a comparison between program and project. So just at a high level, program duration is generally significantly longer. While many projects now have quite a short duration, there are some programs that last anywhere from 5 to 10 to 20, even some that are in the 40 to 50 year time span. Programs are also generally tied to the organization's financial calendar, whereas projects have a project budget. Program management is very governance intensive. It's making sure that all of the pieces line up properly so that benefits are incurred when intended, so that stakeholders can be properly engaged, so that all the pieces fall into line where they're supposed to. Programs from a scope perspective have a much larger span of activity than what happens within a project scope. And because of that, the financial management aspects that surround that program's body of work are significantly larger. They generally span multiple departments and have impacts greater than one department. And then this is something I already mentioned, the change management component of what is expected at a program level really does require a significant capability to communicate with folks at all levels, and particularly the C-suite or executive leadership. Projects generally deal at a very task-oriented nature, have line leadership or department leadership that are engaged. When you move into the program space, you're looking at division heads and higher as a general rule. While this is not consistent across all organizations, generally speaking, you are dealing with executives when you're dealing with programs, and whether those are junior level executives or senior level executives, there is an executive stance for program activity that is not necessarily present at a project level. Some core skills that are required at a program level, there's a list of them right here. If you look at what the core skills are for a project manager, you will find some things that are the same. Active listening, something they're required at both a project and a program level, but the level of presentation skills, change management skills, critical thinking skills, significantly more advanced at a program level than they are at a project level. Some core knowledge areas.
Hi, Jennifer.
So, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I saw somebody's hand. Well, actually, I don't see it now. Somebody's hand was raised, and I was going to see if they had a question, but never mind. I don't see it now.
Okay.
Hi, Rita.
Okay, it's back up again. Roman Montez.
Hi,
Okay, Roman.
Hi, it's Montez Roman. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
ma'am.
Yes.
That's okay, no worries. So my quick question was, did you have a recommendation if, in terms of career pathing, should you be a project manager before embarking on program management, or is that really a personal preference?
I'm going to say it has to be an organizational preference. I'm going to explain myself. Some organizations feel that the skill set required between the two types are distinctly different, and there are other organizations that don't recognize that there is any difference. So depending upon your organization, that may drive your decision. Also, whether or not you're going to stay with that organization or you desire to move to another. Smaller organizations tend to put things together, expect more hats to be worn by a single individual, whereas in larger organization, the work is more segmented and it's much easier understood that these are different roles and different responsibility sets. So that's somewhat of a non-answer to your question, but it is very much organization specific. From a PMI perspective, the expectation is that you understand how project management works in order to be a program manager. And I know of no better way to fully understand something other than doing it.
That's right.
You can certainly never manage a project and be a program manager. There are people who do that, but having the knowledge of doing the job will make you much more appreciative of the work that needs to be executed.
Fully agree, Jennifer. Good point.
Yep.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jennifer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so a couple of other things I want to point out on this slide. Program managers are generally responsible either directly or indirectly for managing resources. So your folks may be indirectly reporting to you, but you still are expected to do performance reviews for them or contribute to their performance review. So the ability to coach and mentor very important. And then there is all of the whole team dynamics component that it's very important that a program manager understand that. The risk and issues component, I think is very similar, although it is very much at a higher level. But the biggest thing is being able to both lead and manage. And I have some a slide with some synthesis between them. But management is generally very administrative, and which absolutely aligns to the governance nature within programs and what's required, making sure that, if you will, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But you need to be able to lead and have folks be willing to follow you and to see the vision. If you have ever talked to someone who is exceedingly good at leadership skills and the ability to lead, you almost want to follow them and do what they recommend be done, where that necessarily is not going to happen with a good manager. The best program managers are able to synthesize both leadership and management to be effective at their work. There are significantly more financial responsibilities for a program manager than there are for a project manager. There's also a large amount of contract-based work as a general rule in the program space. Understanding how contracts work, the different types of contracts, what the benefits and risks are of those types, very much an acquired skill set, many times through experience. That's something that a program manager must be able to do. We already talked a lot about the change management aspects and the ability to communicate, but the last piece is from a responsibility perspective. Program managers are responsible for their team. They're responsible for the delivery of this work. It requires some sense of ethics, polish, intelligence, well-rounded, and to be able to deliver this and deliver it well. Depending upon the type of work that you're doing, safety may or may not be a significant component of your work, but for some people, it is everything about their work. So those safety standards and procedures are very much key. And if you are a program manager in a space where safety is a day-to-day concern, you are also responsible for the safety standards, procedures, and execution within your program delivery. So all of these things put together are things that are contained within the program standard, and the expectation within the exam is that a program manager possesses this knowledge and those skills, and there are questions related in some respect to all of this within the exam.
Jennifer?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Nealon has a question. Let me unmute him. Oops, I can't unmute you. Go ahead and unmute. Are you able to unmute, Neil?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Good evening, Jennifer, and thanks for putting this together, Verlette and Jennifer. From a very practical standpoint, and I reflect back upon the question was just asked from a career standpoint. All these points that Jennifer's making, you get your sea legs, if you will, as a PM. At least I know I did. And I know a lot of others have, as they've gone on to become program managers. Before I retired, I was a program manager. I can't imagine how I would have been effective as a leader, as a program manager, without having that foundational learning and base as a project manager. That gave me a lot of foundational information and also helped me to better relate to the team of project managers. That was all I wanted to add, Jennifer. Okay,
thank you. Yeah, and that's what I was talking about, is having that appreciation. One of the things as a manager and a leader for me, I would never want to ask anybody to do anything that I wasn't willing to do myself.
Correct.
And if you have the project management experience and you know what's going on, it makes it a lot easier for you to ask someone else to do it. And
Yep.
that's also where this code of ethics and professional conduct kicks in. Very important. If you wouldn't do it yourself, you shouldn't be asking somebody else to do it.
Amen.
Okay. So a few minutes ago, I talked about the synthesis between leadership and management, and here are four little diagrams, if you will, about what the differences are between them. But the one that I like the best is the one in the upper left-hand corner, because it looks at what are the things that leaders do and what are the things that managers do and what happens when you put them together. And when you look at that resulting synergy down the center, those are all things that we expect of a program manager. We expect them to be effective, to be innovative, to promote teamwork, to accomplish the goals and empower their teams. So really that's somewhat of what you are looking for in that skill set. When you look at the skills and competencies questions that are within the PgMP exam, a lot of those questions have to do with teamwork, empowering your team, being innovative, and accomplishing this or achieving the strategic goals. Okay. Oops, what happened? All right. Yeah, one day I'll get the hang of Teams. I really will. One day I will get the hang of Teams. Okay. Neelan, do you have another question? Your hand is still up.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know how. Let me push the button for the lower hand. I don't have a question. You're doing very well. You're doing very well.
All right. Does anybody have any questions over any of the things that we just went over? Okay, so now I think, and I don't know exactly how to do this, I'm going to see if I can figure this out. Verlette, can you take everybody off of mute for just a moment? And we're going to go into question mode. And so I would like for you to be able to chime in and say the answer if you know it. You'll notice that these are not in multiple choice order, and that is by design. It is easier for you to answer a question when you know the answer than to pick it out of multiple choice deck, because there's typically one word within one of those multiple choice answers that's going to throw you off. If you know exactly what the answer is, you look for the answer instead of guess what the answer is between your four choices. Okay, so that's how we're going to approach this. Can we unmute everybody?
Hang on one second, I'm testing.
Okay.
Hold on one second. I'm trying to do triple duty over here. One second.
They can unmute themselves.
Thank you, Neelan.
Okay, very good. All right, well, if you know the answer, please unmute yourself and answer. All right. So somebody describe a portfolio for me.
A group of related programs and projects.
And subportfolios?
Portfolio is not related, just organization initiative.
Right, they aren't necessarily related, but they can be. So the intent of a portfolio is to achieve strategic objectives. Lots of times portfolios are grouped together because they're all database related or technology related or business process related, and that work is grouped together, but it does not necessarily need to be directly related. Okay, your key point here is to achieve strategic objectives, right? That is the glue, if you will, for a portfolio. How does a program link to the portfolio?
So one portfolio can have multiple programs, and program is basically fulfilling one of the strategic objectives for the portfolio.
Yep. It is going to take one of those strategic goals and achieve it. It could have multiple components within it that helps to achieve that link or that goal. But that is absolutely the link. It is achieving that goal. Our program's always initiated from the portfolio.
I think it's part of the
No.
Not necessarily.
No, there can be a group of projects that create the program for the portfolio.
That's right. So there are many reasons why a program can be initiated. And while if you are in a PMO intensive organization or a portfolio intensive organization, those programs may be initiated from there. That is not the only way for it to be initiated. Some programs, for example, organizational redesign, can be kicked off without ever going through a portfolio. Our program's always strategic in nature.
No.
I would say no.
Yep, that's the correct answer. So remember, some can be compliance driven and some can be
Process
emergent.
improvement.
Yep, emergent. So next one,
And
three broad categories
Jennifer,
of. Yes,
just for a
ma'am.
second, but it might be leading into this one. Is emergent the name that PMI is looking for?
Yes.
So if you had the test, you would have to make sure you used emergent.
Yeah, those are the three sources of programs are strategic, compliance, and emergent.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Neeland, I put you on mute because it was feedback. Take yourself off.
That's what you call a PMI-ism. There, some terms that you just gotta know hard code, and that's one of them. Emergent. That's a PMI term. You may not hear that in the workplace, but you'll definitely see it on the exam.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
What are the three broad categories of programs?
Is it definition, benefit delivery, and close?
Those are the life cycle. We just told you the answer.
Oh, strategic, is it strategic?
Compliance and emergent.
Compliance and emergent.
Yep,
Sorry, I just had that arrow crossed out the different way.
that's okay. So at this point, we're going to go into strategic program management. It's 7 o'clock. If you would like to take a short 5-minute break, bio break or whatever, this would be the time for us to do that.
Okay.
So want to go ahead and get started again and go through this next section, right?
And put yourself back on mute.
Yeah. So go ahead and get going. All right. Whoops. All right. So from strategic program management, let's go ahead and start this. These are the components that we'll talk about in this domain, and we'll go through each one of them one at a time and talk about what that looks like and what is contained within. Okay. So elements of program strategy alignment. So you need to have a program roadmap, a program plan, and a business case. And all of those things will wrap up into a program management plan. The business case is very likely how you got funded, as well as how you defined at least some of the components within the program, not necessarily all of them. Your program plan at a high level is the strategic work that the program is going to do, and at a high level, how are you going to go about doing that? And that is mapped out in a graphical sense in the program roadmap. You'll include any external things that are needed. So if you need to have a contract with a third-party vendor, if you have regulatory impact, that sort of thing, all those environmental things that are outside of the organization need to be well defined at that point, and then you need to set up a program management plan. And we'll give you some examples of these documents and what is contained within a good plan so that you have an example. So we'll start with a business case. There are internal and external drivers for the work, and that all needs to be documented. We've already talked about, there's a great number of examples that specifically contain compliance level things, regulatory requirements. There's also very likely some rules of engagement, depending upon the work that you're doing. That all needs to be documented within the business case. You also need to look at the businesses that you are working with and what their capabilities are. If you need capabilities that don't exist within the organization, you need to go get them. And if you have to go get them, you need money to go get them with, and that needs to be documented within the business case. Not only I need money to go get this capability, but why you're not using an internal resource, i.e. it doesn't exist, it's over capacity, whatever the challenge is about why it can't be internal. All of those capabilities that are required need to be documented, and if you are leaving the organization to either provide or augment that capability, all of that needs to be embedded within the business case. How you are going to break up the program, the components embedded within it need to be documented. That doesn't mean that every single piece of work needs to be well defined with a schedule within the program plan, but at a high level, you're going to need a program that has 5 projects or 20 projects, and then what those projects are at a high level. If it is a sub-program of work, this is what that program of work is going to be doing. But that is documented at a high level. You're not expected at this stage of the game in the program business case to have a full level component detail for each component. So you're not expected to have a budget and a schedule for each component project within the program, but you are expected to have some understanding of what the scope would be, what your swag, if you will, or however that budget was obtained for that work, and any high level assumptions and risks that are currently known for that work. All of those things need to be embedded within a business case. So these pieces of a business case, there are multiple questions about business cases contained within the exam. One of the pieces that I particularly remember from when I sat the exam was how the benefits are documented within the business case, and alternatives analysis that was embedded within the business case. Alternatives analysis is how you would deliver those benefits another way and why you did not choose that way to deliver. I'm going to give you an example. One of the things that I worked on when I was at Duke was the transmission lines to plants that were being updated or replaced. The Asheville plant is a coal-fired plant, and it was very close to capacity. So despite the fact that there was a lot of work going, we had to put in a new transmission line. The most direct route to go from the area where the power was needed to the plant was through the Pisgah National Forest and through a Cherokee burial ground. I think that most of you can immediately roll your eyes and think about the red tape required to do that, because you're looking at national land, and because it's Cherokee land, that's like dealing with another nation. But that was the most direct route. We did not choose that route in the business case, and it was for those reasons. It would have been very expensive and very timely to go that route. Even going a longer route, which required included acquiring more land or lease options on land that is a significantly larger mass than the most direct route, it was still less expensive and faster to take the longer route. That explanation, that alternatives analysis, is embedded within that business case. And when you do a business case for a program, that alternatives analysis, that alternate way of delivering benefits is expected to be noted within your business case. That program assessment, I mentioned this a moment ago, but one of the things that you do as to formulate the work is to do an assessment of the organization and determine what capabilities exist and what capabilities don't exist and what capabilities need to be augmented. That initial program assessment is how you determine what needs to get done and by whom, and what help is needed from other areas within the organization or from outside the organization. That program assessment needs to be well documented and listed out, because very likely the results of that assessment are components within your business case and is going to require funding to make your program work and deliver those benefits in accordance with the strategic goals. One of the things that you are going to be expected to do is to have a high-level roadmap for the program. I showed one earlier where you have the components listed, what benefits are yielding from what component. In some cases, multiple components deliver a single benefit, but the ability to have a visual of the program, the components within it, and when benefits are going to be delivered is something that is going to be needed, especially when communicating with executive staff, to help them see at a glance, this is the work that needs to be done, and this is when I'm going to see the benefits that are delivered from its work. Here is another example of a program roadmap. You can see when the milestones are by those diamond shapes, and the arrows are the work that is executed to get you to that milestone. This is just one example. There are many out there. There is not a preferred or required template, just that you have a program roadmap. The test will ask about program roadmaps, but it's important for you to know there's not a required format. Here's another one. This is the one from NASA for some of the crew certification testing, but you can look here and see the same sort of thing. There is a time scale and a specific listing of which partners are going to go through training and when. So very plain to see that information and when those benefits are going to be shown. Okay. So the framework of what's going to be done also needs to be defined. So that roadmap diagram that you've created for the program helps you to define what that framework looks like, so that you can document and graph out, this is the definition period, this is the planning, and this is the execution. And also, when are you expecting to get to the point for transition and closure? the mission statement of the program and what it's going to do needs to be clearly stated. Stakeholders need to understand what it is. Very important that you have that documented. In this particular graphic, you'll see that the mission is over 3 particular projects, and there are objectives of that project listed. And you'll notice there's a 4th one off to the side. Can anybody tell me why that 4th project is off to the side?
Is that the alternative one?
Nope.
It looks like that might be something that has to happen after the first 3 are completed. You wouldn't want to migrate data until other things are complete.
Well, sort of, but you're very, very close to the mark. Some of it has to be done beforehand. The work that's in project 4 is called an enabler project. It needs to be done for you to be able to do the others and you to be able to deliver the overall objective. So in this particular example, you were going to move a particular application suite off of the mainframe onto a cloud-based solution. Each project listed has a particular component of that data migration embedded within it. But you can't take the mainframe down until you've migrated all the data that's on it and offloaded to be able to do that. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes,
Yep.
and also I think Lakivia had a question.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yes. Is there a reason why that particular objective is red? Is it because it is the enabler?
Yes, ma'am. I did that on purpose so that you could easily see it and distinguish. If I'd made it blue, you wouldn't necessarily have noticed that it was not under the mission.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. So this is another thing that when you do your business case, if you do have enabler projects, you need to note that work within your business case. Even though the work does not directly tie to the strategic objectives that you are delivering, to the benefits that you are delivering, you need to execute that work in order to be able to do it. So enabler projects need to be listed out within your business case so it is clearly understood that you need to do that. Okay. Mentioned this earlier. So really part of that program assessment is understanding what the organization is capable of and what they're not capable of. Lots of organizations are very good at certain sets of activities, but not so good at others. For example, there are some organizations that when it comes to customer service management, taking care of their customers, making sure that those customers have everything they need, they knock it out of the park. When it comes to taking care of their own internal, not so much. That organization would be one that would need some additional or outright extra human resource capability support to do work in that space. Not because they can't do anything. I've already said they can do CRM and do it very, very well, but they'll need that extra support to do a function that they don't necessarily do quite as well. Okay. It's important for you to accurately assess what's going on within the organization in order to be successful. If you are not forthcoming about weaknesses within the organization and don't obtain the additional capability support that you need to do your work, you're not going to be successful. So if you know an organization is weak in a particular area, it's important to call it out and get the support that you need. in the long run, it makes that weakness have support so that it can be strong and succeed, which is what everybody wants. Nobody wants anyone to fail, but particularly when you're trying to deliver a strategic objective, strategic goals, very important to be successful. If you have a particular area that needs help, you need to make sure that you call out that that help is needed and make sure that those folks get the support that they need. The way that you do that is to identify that within the assessment and get that support within the business case, okay? So here is a high-level listing of strategic and operational processes within an organization. Some organizations have a department that is labeled as strategy. I mentioned this earlier. That doesn't necessarily mean they're project folks. In fact, in most cases, they're not. That strategic execution link, if you will, is what programs are supposed to do. They're supposed to take that strategic goal, that strategic objective, apply their magic, do their work, and then transition that into benefits and value for the organization, so it becomes an operational process for them. Programs by nature fill that strategic execution gap. If you look on this particular diagram, that gray section in the middle, portfolio management, strategic planning management of projects, programs, and operations, that is strategic execution. It is well documented at PMI and many other places that there is a strategic execution gap. And that is what portfolios, programs, and projects are intended to fill. Okay, I've said that 3 times now. So the reason I said it 3 times is because there is a question in some state or format on your exam for that. Organizational benefits. So this is a really difficult thing to assess. If you are putting the business case together and you are helping to identify what benefits can be delivered by your program's work, one of the things that you need to make sure that you do is not focus solely on the financial benefits. While there are always going to be financial benefits of some sort that can be derived from strategic work, there are also very likely non-financial benefits that can be obtained. So if you think about, for example, changes to rectify a toxic culture, if you are able to process changes that make a toxic culture go away, there's really not a financial benefit to that that can be directly attributed. Long term, there's lots of financial benefit, less turnover, happier employees, better performance, all those sorts of things. But cultural changes generally do not have a direct financial benefit, even though longer term, that's exactly what happens. So when you are working on the definition of what benefits can be obtained from the program's work, you need to focus on both the tangible and intangible benefits that can be obtained from the program's work. I'm going to give you another example. One of the organizations that I worked with was 97% male. And by that, I mean only 3% of its employees, 3% were female. I think all of us on the phone can acknowledge that in everyday life, it is closer to a 50-50 blend in almost every circumstance than that 97 to 3%. This organization knew that they were in a lot of trouble and needed to make significant changes to rectify that imbalance. And it wasn't just that challenge with women. When you looked at other aspects of its hiring practices, how it engaged with contracts and vendors, there were also disparities, not only dealing with women, but dealing with minorities, dealing with veterans, all kinds of specialty, if you will, groups. They launched a program to rectify this. Now, while there was no direct financial benefits listed, there were lots of intangible benefits listed. Culture was the biggest one. They looked at increasing the number of women that they hire, increasing the number of veterans they hire, increasing the number of people of color that they hire. But it extended far past where they hire. It also included people that engage in contract activity, vendors that they worked with, making sure that those individuals were minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses. Guess what happened? After they executed this series of work, they got it to about 12% women. It's a sizable difference, not exactly what they were hoping for, but significantly better. But the biggest change came from the vendor management and contract management perspective, because they found that not only did they have a much better ratio of vendor mix, they also got tax credits from dealing with folks that were minority-owned businesses and veterans-owned businesses, et cetera. It ended up saving them thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from executing this program of work aimed at improving their culture. Why did I spend such a long time telling you that example? None of the benefits listed for that program of work were listed as financial, but the long-term results of that work were absolutely financial. When you define the benefits for your program, please do not forget that there are a large number of benefits that you need to look at that are not necessarily financial in nature. Look for the intangible things and make sure those are also documented. So we just spent a lot of time talking about this. One point I want to make is the funding authorization for your work. That can't happen unless you estimate what that benefit is. When you have a financial benefit, it's very easy to monetize that, not so much with the intangible or the non-financial benefits, but you need to at least state out what those benefits might be. Janine, you had a question.
I guess I jumped the gun because it sounds like you're answering it right now. Because how, if like you were having employee turnover, would you be able to use statistics from other areas that, you know, like the Bureau of Labor, for lack of something else to think about, to help project what you would expect?
Yeah, so one of the things that the company that I just mentioned, because they are known for having a toxic workforce, especially for women, they estimated how much it costs them per employee when they have to turn over a new employee. And when they looked at that and compared that with what other organizations did that had a higher percentage of women, people of color, and veteran staff, their numbers were significantly lower because they did less of it. And they used that as part of the ratio. Now, it wasn't directly, this is how much money it's going to save, but it was an example comparing how much it costs them for each turned over employee versus other companies in the industry, because those other companies have less turnovers and cost them less money. So it wasn't a 1-for-1, but it was a comparison within the industry. So it was a good judge or basis for what could be expected.
Okay, thank you.
So the next one is evaluate the program objectives. Very likely there are legal and regulatory constraints or impacts to the work that you're going to be executing, and what those impacts or constraints are need to be stated and understood as a part of the program objectives. Folks need to understand what those are, particularly stakeholders, and how those constraints impact the program's work, so that there are no surprises when you say, well, we can't do that because of such and such regulatory requirement, or because this is a law that we can't break, or whatever the reasoning is. Folks need to understand where those constraints are and what they mean. So some things I want to talk a little bit about, make sure folks understand. There's some discussion within the exam about outcomes and what that looks like. So there are short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes from the benefits that are achieved through a program's work. And those are going to be defined within the program plan and how you document benefits. Those outcome listings, or those benefits, and when they're achieved and how they're maintained, are documented within that plan and is part of your transition plan. Short-term benefits or short-term outcomes, you can somewhat mirror this to the benefits that are achieved during the delivery of the program, and midterm can be equated to ones that are delivered shortly after transition and closure, or even during transition and closure, and then long-term for the ones that come after program closure. They are not tied directly to the inputs and outputs of the life cycle components of the program, but more so for the benefit delivery of the program's work. Okay. Whenever you obtain approval for a business case, you need to get leadership approval, and that's going to include high-level costs, a milestone level schedule, what benefits you are expected to achieve, and when. One point I would make is, depending upon your organization, approval from leadership and financial approval are not necessarily one in the same. Lakivia, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Hi, thank you. Hello, everybody. I didn't say that before. On that previous slide, you have like acronyms there. So ST, MT, and LT. I think I may have
Short-term, mid-term, long-term.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So remember that leadership approval and financial approval are not always the same. So for example, if you have an organization, for example, you're in energy space, some of your program's work could impact rates. If that's the case, you may need to get approval from the Utility Commission in order to proceed if it impacts the rates and you're in a regulated state for utility. There could be other components to financial approval outside of your organization, or it could be that just because your CIO says to yes, go do that, that doesn't necessarily mean you have Treasury approval. You might still need to get the CFO to approve. So think about those two components. Depending upon your organization, they are not necessarily one and the same. There are some organizations where that is it is the same, but not necessarily the case in every organization. Within the verbiage for the exam, there is a qualifier, if you will, for leadership and financial approval. So I just wanted to point that out. There are many organizations where they are separate as well as those that are the same. But from a PMI perspective, they are two distinct separate activities. And you should know that when you go to take the exam. If you have a question, they are not the same thing. So integration. Lots and lots of program activities require integration with operations. Sometimes it's very obvious that this is going to happen, particularly, for example, in the merger space. If you're taking one organization and blending it with another organization, you're absolutely going to have operational impact. There are other components where you may feel like there's nothing that this project is going to do that's going to impact operations, but very likely there's a downstream impact. So really think about, from a project or component delivery, where are the integration points? It may be late to the end, like you do all the work and then you hand it to operations, but there's still an impact there, even though it's at the end. They still have to accept that work, even though they didn't have to, quote, do anything, they still have to accept that work at the end. There's always an integration point. So as a part of the program activity, you need to make sure that you define what are all the integration points for each component. In some circumstances, there may be multiple integration points within each component, depending upon the type of work that's being done. Okay. So here is a healthcare example. So if any of you are MyChart users for Novant, this might look familiar to you. This is the process or the stages of integration they used within that organization for one of the components embedded within it of how the integration points go from the infrastructure into the doctor's offices. So what does that look like and what does that flow look like? You need to be able to map that out. Okay. The next piece I want to talk about is opportunity. From a general perspective, an opportunity is a positive risk. For some folks, what I just said is going to take some getting used to. When you think about a risk, how you approach it, you find a way to make its impact less. Its potential impact is so minute that it's very likely not going to happen, so you ignore it or accept it. Or you have some way to transfer that risk to another organization. There are very similar pairings for positive risks. So instead of mitigating that risk, you enhance it. You make it more likely to happen. So instead of transferring the ownership of that risk to another entity, perhaps you share it and co-deliver. Instead of avoiding that risk, perhaps you exploit it to make sure that it happens. Those are the positive spins for opportunity. When you are looking at a program, one of the things that you are looking at is, are there positive risks or opportunities for change that exist that you can create, exploit, or utilize within your program's work? I'm going to give you an example. One of the programs that I worked on looked at the process for linemen and folks that would go out to homes to read meters or do other types of work from a utility perspective to replace parts and that sort of thing. They used a separate process than everyone else in the organization, not only to order parts, but to receive them and to go through how that happens within their workflow. Who gets the part, who installs the part. They could not necessarily be the same person. It was very much disparate. So in the program of work, they looked at how do they fix this process. As they were going through that work, they said, hey, you know, we could include this organization who also has some challenges and get some additional benefits and cost savings for eliminating 2 systems with 1. And then looked again and said, oh, we can do that for this one and this one and this one, and found multiple opportunities for change. And while their initial scope was only for those folks that go to do customer calls, it expanded to include a large percentage of the distribution organization because they sought out opportunities for change and process improvement and were able to provide significant value to the organization that was closely tied to the original work because they sought out opportunities to change. They looked for a way to maximize benefits. When you are managing a program, one of the things that you need to do is look for ways to maximize those benefits. I can give you another example that is in the IT space. So if you are looking at a series of work to upgrade all types of machines to a single operating system, and then you notice that there are 15 different ways that the particular process, let's say printing, is executed across all these different machines. If you standardize that process amongst all those machines, you've reduced the complexity and the serviceability, increased the serviceability of all those machines. So that is a significant process improvement, right? That is a way to increase the benefit to the organization from a machine perspective. That additional benefit, while it wasn't covered in the initial scope, would allow you to decrease support costs for those machines because now everybody was printing the same way. So you don't have to sit there and troubleshoot how is this machine printing versus this machine or that machine because they're all printing the same way. And it greatly speeds up the support process. There's lots of opportunities from a wide array of different program types where you can look for opportunities for change and exploit them. That is an expectation of a program manager, is to look for opportunities for change and to include what opportunities you currently see within the business case. If there are opportunities that you see that you cannot immediately implement, those are things that might be listed in an alternatives analysis in that business case. As you identify opportunities for change, there are particular areas where you may want to look. These 2 sides of a coin, if you will, internal versus external, can be very easily equated to a SWOT analysis. Strengths and weaknesses would be the internal side, and opportunities and threats would be the external side. However you identify what those opportunities for change are and where they are, you'll need to look through what exists and how you may achieve them. This particular spoke pattern that is to the left is one way to do that. A SWOT analysis is another way to do that. But identifying opportunities for change is an expectation for a program manager, and that work should be defined within the business case and reviewed regularly throughout the life of the program to exploit potential opportunity. Does anybody have any questions before we go through the questions that I'm going to ask you?
I just had a question. I mean, a comment. Excuse me. This is Lakivia. Thank you for explaining like the benefit on, finding ways to maximize process